All right, welcome to WP Radio. I just wanted to let everybody know this is a recorded segment from WP Radio Live at the OIAA Claims Conference in January 2019. I hope you enjoy all the different little elevator pitches from all the companies. So sit back, relax, and enjoy it, and we'll see you soon. It's Terry Doherty. We're live at WP Radio, and my next speaker this afternoon is Dr. Phillip Palmer. Dr. Palmer, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Good to be here, Terry.
And Dr. Palmer, tell me, what's the name of your company?
We're Genesis Rehabilitation and Physiotherapy.
And what do you guys do at Genesis?
So we do multidisciplinary treatment for patients that have had sports injuries or car accidents, concussions, things of that nature.
And where are you guys located?
We have two locations in Toronto, one at Jane and Shepherd and another one right by Vaughan Mills in Vaughan.
And do you do MVAs, slip and falls, sports and sports-related stuff?
That's right, correct.
And what kind of stuff do you do it for the physio and the rehab? Is it active? Is it passive? Is it a combination of both?
Yeah, depending on the injuries, it's a combination of both. But we use a computer-based software program called the OptiGate, which allows us to document not only in the assessment, but through the treatment program and reevaluations to see what the program is doing for the patient and to give them objective results of that.
And is that something that how is that gauged? Is that something where it should be, like on their reflexes or on their strength, or how is that all taken into account?
So you can run a number of different programs. So from having been in the New York Rangers training camp as a consultant, or AC Milan, or just dealing with concussion patients from car accidents, there's different protocols. So you do assessments of gait for balance. You do march in place tests. You can do single leg strength and power tests for athletes to check on their symmetry, where there's a deficiency. As you know, Terry, in the very high level sporting world, performance, a % or 2 is huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of these teams want to make sure that their athletes are functioning to their max capacity.
So tell me, what type of doctor are you?
I'm a chiropractor, and I have a specialty in rehabilitation.
So I heard you say you went to the Rangers camp?
That's right. I consulted in 2012 at the New York Rangers, and I've been to AC Milan and Barcelona as well.
For the soccer clubs?
Correct.
Excellent. And so how did you get involved in that?
I actually was one of the first people in Canada to have the OptiGate system. So there's an American gentleman by the name of Dr. Peter Gorman, who's a chiropractor from New York. And he brought the technology from Italy. It was developed in Italy and was used, originally for Juventus, which is, as you know, a soccer team.
Yeah, a soccer team, yeah.
And he brought that technology to North America. And I was at the American Chiropractic Rehabilitation Board Symposium Conference.
Yeah.
And he was demoing that software. So basically it's like 2 skis that you place on the ground or a treadmill. And he was, demonstrating what he was doing. And I said, look, I need one of those right away for my practice. So I was one of the first people operating the machine in Canada, and he needed testers. So he asked me to come along with him.
Wow, that's great. So is it something that people, most rehab facilities have? Because I've never heard of it, I got to be honest.
Yeah, I wouldn't say you would see this in a lot of places. It's extremely specialized equipment, but having said that, there's no reason for clinics not to have it. I mean,
sounds pretty cutting edge, though.
It's very cutting edge. But, in this new, evidence-based practice world, which is what we try and run, if you don't have objective data, it's kind of like trying to hit a dartboard in the dark. I want to know what we're dealing with in terms of each injury when it comes in the door. And I want to have some type of goals or outcomes that we're able to hit and test it, in a way that there's no bias or subjectivity involved.
Now, does it also help with malingerers as well? So it will identify somebody that's malingering as opposed to somebody that literally is making an effort, but it's just not there yet?
Right. Because basically, Terry, you can't fool the machine. So all of these tests that we're doing, we do 3 tests of the same thing, and you'll see a similar pattern. But if you do 3 tests and they're completely off in different aspects, it doesn't make any sense, right? Like the person's going to have a presentation, which is a certain way, and they'll be able to, if there is a dysfunction there, they're going to repeat that same dysfunction. But if you have a patient that's trying to say, well, I have a left knee issue, but when you do a gait test, on 2 of the 3 trials, their left knee has the greatest push-off. It's not a left knee issue.
Yeah, it's something else.
Right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about the training camps. Like, what did you do with them? Were you helping evaluate the athletes for readiness for camp, or what did it all involve there?
Yeah. So what the group that I was part of, we would go in and do so at the beginning of all the training camps, they would do a kind of a baseline on all their players. So,
sure.
The forward-thinking athletic therapists kind of knew that how many push-ups or how many pull-ups or the maximum that they could squat had really no correlation to their on-ice performance or their on-field performance. They needed something that tested the actual, movements and things they were going to perform in a game. So like skating, power, a lot of power testing. So doing different jumping tests, one leg at a time, doing tests where they jump as high as they can and then jump after that as far as they can to test their ability to make an explosive movement and recover. So, the Italians that developed the software just kind of took the tests that they did for soccer and modified them for skating. It was extremely brilliant.
Wow.
So it was a lot more like, let's do movements specific to what I have to do on the field, as opposed to just the Canadian standardized fitness test, right?
Sure. 3 pull-ups, 6 chin-ups, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't really correlate to skating, but we can see not only by their figures what they were capable of, but also where they may have a problem or an injury brewing, that the training staff couldn't say, hey, you've got an issue. The athlete couldn't necessarily put a finger on it, but we were able to pick out what, with a greater than 5% difference between sides is what we're looking at, which is, for a pro athlete, that's a lot, but
that is a lot.
In terms of just evaluating someone for an injury, if there was anything over 5%, that would have to be addressed before they could go back on the ice. So it was a maximizing performance and reducing the injuries.
And you could also look at it year over year, too, to see if they're developing or if they're stagnant or if they're actually losing muscle performance.
Right, exactly. And, nowadays in the world of sports, as you know, these general programs that they just give every athlete, okay, here's your program. It's the same for everybody. You're doing this bench press, this squat. Now what we're seeing is that they're able to say, okay, you have this issue with your right leg, but your left leg has a different issue. So we're going to train those issues separately, and then we'll reevaluate you with the Optogate after. So it's becoming much more specific and as you said, high tech.
So let's talk about head injuries, because head injuries are, I find them very interesting, about people with concussion and post-concussion syndrome. Mm-hmm. How do you guys treat that? Tell me about that.
It's very different based on each presentation. A lot of people, whether they've had a concussion or they're recovering from a concussion, will identify symptoms where they're just not right, but they can't exactly put a finger on how or why. So if you're watching somebody walk, the body gets very good at compensating for a dysfunction. But when you have them walk for a long period of time, you start to pick those issues up. Well, not me, but the machine. The software picks it up.
Yeah, and closing your eyes and standing on one foot, if you can balance, and those kind of stretching type.
Though that kind of idea, like marching in place or marching in place with your eyes closed.
Yep.
And then when you have somebody do a physical task like walking on a treadmill, and then make them add executive functioning into that. So asking them to do math problems or, look at lights and identify, which light it is. It really confuses the nervous system and it brings out the dysfunctions.
Now, we talk about I've heard a lot of people say you've got a concussion or you've got a brain injury, you've got a traumatic brain injury. What's the difference? So for the people that don't know, fortunately I do know, let's talk about the different types of concussions or the severity,
Okay.
brain injury, traumatic brain injury, or just your standard concussion.
Right. So I would say that most concussions that we see in our office would be termed minor brain injuries, right? They're not a traumatic brain injury could be a very hard hit to the head or a stroke where you're not really going to regain that part of your brain, or it's very unlikely. Where, for instance, you could have like a TIA or a transient ischemic attack, which is technically a dysfunction of your brain, but you recover from it quickly.
Yep.
So for my what we're working with particularly is the mild traumatic brain injury, or which are most concussions, in my opinion.
So your MVA where there's a whiplash
Right.
involved injury.
Or, that would have to be a very forceful hit. It would also, for a concussion, you'd almost have to hit your head on the glass or something like that. Like, I understand you can get that your brainstem trauma from that, forceful flexion and extension.
Yeah.
But it tends to be more a hit on the glass or something on the car, or people on a bus.
Headrest.
Right, or the bus, they hit their head on that pole that people hold on to. Things like that, yeah.
So what else do you guys treat at the facility?
Pretty much everything. I mean, sports injuries, you're going to get, everything from cruciate ligaments to hip fractures, hip pointers, high ankle sprains, back, headaches.
People having to have parts metal put in them, and then the rehab that goes with that?
Yes, often. Or even, just scopes where they're getting ligaments reattached, or, minor disc, operations, things like that.
Yeah, as having a kid who was both my kids were high-level athletes, but my son in particular had to have surgery of his humerus, and they had to move his radial nerve. So then he lost the use of his hand and most of his arm for about 8 weeks.
Right.
And the doctor said it'll either come back over time or it won't come back. But, we don't know. So, you go through these things and you wonder, like, what's the rehab for that? And then you find out there isn't any until after it starts to come back.
Right.
Right? So you're left with these kind of things wondering. So I'm always interested to see, you talk about the system, the abdicate and stuff like that. For me, that's really interesting. And,
right. Well, it's particularly good for, we do see some patients that have had amputations from car accidents, foot, toes, motorcyclists.
Yes.
That's a big one for
the
them.
organ donor people. Yeah.
So you talk about the nerve and that interaction of wondering whether it'll come back or not. But you just, obviously do what you can.
Yeah.
You do as much balance and proprioceptive work, or just, kinesthetic awareness, and it kind of fires the nervous system back up.
Do you guys use any water aerobics or any things like that for people, like swimming and stuff like that?
Yeah, we don't have aquatherapy at our clinic, but we have a very good community center nearby that offers that.
And you offer that type of like teaching them those types of programs to get into and involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say probably 30% of our patients that we see and rehabilitate and then ultimately discharge continue with those programs afterwards.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Dr. Palmer, how would people get in touch with you at your company? How do they reach out, adjusters or somebody that's been hurt? How can they contact you?
Yeah, the website is Genesis, GENESIS at genesisrehab.net.
And what about a phone number? You got toll free or 416?
416-742-3767.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being on the podcast today, Dr. Palmer. I appreciate your time and learning more about Genesis.
Good to be here. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to WP Radio Live. We appreciate your time and listening to the podcast. And check back in a few days as we'll have another one coming out.